Hi everyone, my name is Michelle Adams and this is my presentation for the History and Theory of Public Administration. Today's presentation is going to focus on the public-private sector dichotomy. And during today's presentation, I'm going to go over some of the similarities and differences between the public and private sector. And I'm going to address whether these similarities and differences matter when we talk about the delivery of services. The themes I'm going to focus on today will be organizational efficiency and effectiveness and public interest and investor relations. When we look at the organizational efficiency and effectiveness in both the public and private sector, we are talking about the organization's ability to implement its plans or its delivery of services using the smallest possible expenditure of resources, whether those resources are financial, labor-driven, basically any sort of resource that the organization is utilizing. The end game is to deliver a service in the most efficient and effective way possible. Where we see the biggest difference between the two different sectors is when we look at the leveraging and allocation of those resources. In the public sector, there is a hierarchy of a governing body that hires the executive manager, who then hires his executive management team, who then works with the department directors, office staff, labor staff, and the such to implement the plan or the delivery of services. A similar structure exists within the public sector, but where we see the biggest difference is that in the public sector, there is a expectation that while there is a hierarchy, when something needs to get done or a service needs to be improved or there is an activity that needs to happen that is not necessarily at the level of a manager or an office level staff person, your job description and your title are nothing but a guide. Whereas when you look at the private sector, it's a little bit more structured where a manager manages, the office staff does office work, the labor staff does labor work. It's a little bit more dictated. Recently, I was a part of an exercise at my job where each person in the room was connected using a ball of yarn. Each person represented their part in the delivery service, whether it was water treatment and operations, whether you were management, whether you were office staff, whether you were customer service, or in my case, public and governmental affairs. Once everyone was connected, certain aspects of the service delivery were asked to drop their section of the yarn. So as customer service was asked to drop their yarn, a big section of the web disappeared. As water treatment and operations dropped their section of the yarn, a big portion of the web disappeared. The exercise was used to show that even though we're all in our own space, doing our own thing, working on our own tasks, we're all connected to the ultimate delivery of service and therefore really dependent on one another for the success of the organization and for the quality of the services that we deliver to our customers. I think one of the biggest differences that we see between the public and private sector is who the governing body or management level staff are catering to. When it comes to the public sector and providing services to the public, it's the public that holds the governing body accountable. It's the public that is going to call in and complain and be angry, and ultimately who we as the provider of those public services need to listen to and understand and engage with. In the private sector, we see that management is really in tune with what the investors want. What do the people who are making money off of this private company want? The company is very driven by revenues. When we look at, let's go back for a second. When you take into account an industry such as public versus private utility, a publicly owned utility must create buy-in by the community and establish equity, whereas an investor-owned utility is not held to the same operational standards or the same openness and transparency standards as a publicly owned utility. The next question is, do these similarities and differences really matter when it comes to serving the public? When we look at these two themes of organizational efficiency and public interest, we can refer back to the theories of Gulick and his theory of structure of management and the Paz de Corps, looking at the planning and the organizing, the directing, coordinating, reporting, and budgeting. All processes that both the public and the private sector utilize to run an efficient and effective organization. I truly believe that the ability for an organization to provide good governance and operate effectively internally enhances the ability for that particular organization to provide a quality of service externally. Understanding the difference between the end user or beneficiary in the public and the private sector is vital to understanding how and why they operate the way they do. If the organization's goal is increasing revenues, making money for their investors, their resources are going to be allocated to maximizing their ROI. Conversely, in the public sector, the goal is to improve the quality of life through the provision of services. So our goal in the public sector is to maximize public support for the programs and projects that the agency wants to move forward. I'll go ahead and share my references slide with you in case you want to check out any of the articles that I referenced. And thank you so much for taking the time to watch this presentation, and I hope you have a great weekend.